Now, for old time's sake, I want to play something for Mr. Frank Merrick. This is his former teacher, Leschetizsky, playing a piece by Leschetizsky. Well, now, what do you think? Does that sound like him?
Of course, it's a very moving experience to hear something that I'm told is Leschetizsky playing. I only once heard him play a number of pieces right through. He did a tremendous lot of illustrating in his lessons and very rarely played. I think a lot of that is less poetic and more tumultuous than his intention in composing it. And I think if he'd heard one of us play like that, he would say that the right-hand accompanying passage work was always too loud in comparison with the melodic and harmonic, the melodic thread below, and so on. It is eminently efficient. I don't know that I would go so far as to say that is Leschetizsky if I'd heard it and not been told who was playing it. I don't think I would have done. But I feel very convinced by that recording that that is how he played on that day. I think there can be no doubt of that at all.
Now you are told that it's Leschetizsky, you don't feel inclined to say it couldn't possibly be.
Oh, no, certainly not.
Well, now, Leschetizsky was no great composer, as I think you'll agree. I mean, this is a matter of personal interest. Fortunately, there were greater composers than he who did make piano rolls, people like Grieg, Debussy, Ravel. And I think you'd like to hear Ravel playing one of his own valses nobles et sentimentales, because, after all, this has great historical value. And we're indebted, by the way, to Mr. Kenneth Caswell of America, who has sent us his own recordings of rolls by Paderewski, Leschetizsky and Ravel, performed on one of the few surviving Velter-Mignon machines in the world. And this is Ravel. Lionel, would you like to make any comment about using that kind of thing as a guide to interpretation?
Well, of course, this raises the whole question of whether the composer is always the best interpreter of his own music. So, listening to that performance, one is struck, of course, I think, by the oddly sloppy, romantic way of playing chords with the left hand always before the right.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't accord at all with our mental picture these days of Ravel as a very precise, rather kind of clockwork-minded composer and pianist. One has always felt naturally that a man who can write so brilliantly as he does with the piano must have been able to play this kind of music well. Although there's a tradition around which says that he wasn't in fact a very good pianist. Mm. And now listening to this, one's rather torn between the two. Which is the real truth? Did he get through all these virtuosic fireworks which he wrote in so many of his piano pieces with the kind of finish which we would expect, or did he make a stab at it?
Mm. Well, I can only say, having heard some recordings by, for example, Debussy, some of the playing there is so downright bad, one wouldn't recommend any pupil to listen to it.
No, I've always wondered about that, though. A man who talks about playing the piano as if it had no hammers, it raises suspicions at once in my mind.
Yes, but do you think perhaps there was just something in that performance, some element of character that you might discern?
Yes, there was an element of poetry, certainly there.
Yes.
It was the purely technical finish, which I think would be a very untrustworthy guide for somebody who was going to adopt that system. But of course, can any pupil really base an interpretation on someone else's performance? This is a very dangerous theory altogether.
Yes. What do you feel about that from a teaching point of view, Frank?
The Ravel performance?
Yes.
I enjoyed it. Decidedly, I thought, as Lionel Salter says, that there was real poetry in it. And having come from an era when people's left hand was very much further before the right and having passed through a stage when my own playing was bitterly complained of for the same fault, perhaps I've retained it to this day, that I didn't mind that as much as Lionel Salter did. But Ravel's playing certainly was of real historical interest, and I thought it brought out a good deal of what the music means.
What interests me about this is, you see, that in the course of this talk, you are both now just assuming that that is Ravel's performance. Evidently, you are at any rate half convinced that this machine does give us the playing of the man.
I see no reason to doubt that, because if one was going to fake this thing, supposing anybody would be so monstrously ill-advised, what principles would he try and build this performance on?
Exactly.
How would you try and fake it? Would you try and make a performance which was more accurate, more clean, or more eccentric in a different kind of way? Mm-hmm. Surely the more eccentric a performance is, the more impossible it becomes to fake.
Yes, I think that is the point. Whenever it's eccentric, it is more than ever authentic. Do you agree with that?
I should think that's very true, yes.
Well, now, I think our time's running out and we must come to our final example. I think you'll agree that it would have been nice if this machine had existed in the day of Liszt or Beethoven or someone like that, even though this is what we all feel about it. But anyway, fortunately it did exist at a time when there were composers and performers of the utmost refinement. And what I want you to hear now is a demonstration of just how refined this machine could be. So we'll finish with Debussy's Reflet dans l'eau as played by Ornstein. Well, now, can we agree, at any rate on this much, that these rolls are worth collecting and the piano is worth preserving?
Well, I think it depends on what you're preserving. If it's a performance which has quality in itself, or if it is of some great player or of a composer in his own works, and I think there's a value, obviously, in keeping this, but there should be some central place, surely, where all kinds of recordings, not only player-piano recordings, are kept for reference purposes. We all ought to know how Busoni, Debussy, Grieg, or anybody played their own music, even if we don't agree nowadays. That is the best way of playing it.
But you would accept them as authentic?
Naturally.
Yes. And you would too, Frank?
Most emphatically, yes.